The morning train was packed as usual. Rachel squeezed into a window seat, her eyes heavy from working the night shift at the hospital. She was a nurse, had been for almost 10 years now. And lately every shift felt harder than the last. Her divorce had just been finalized 2 weeks ago, and the papers were still sitting in her bag, unsigned on her end. She kept telling herself she'd deal with them later. Across from her sat a young man with a camera bag. His name was David, though Rachel didn't know that yet. He was scrolling through his phone, looking at overdue rent notices and canceled project emails. His photography business was falling apart. The studio he'd worked so hard to build was slipping through his fingers, one missed payment at a time. He looked tired too, the kind of tired that comes from worry rather than work. The train rattled along its usual route. People buried their faces in phones and newspapers. Nobody talked to each other. That's just how city mornings were, everyone in their own world, dealing with their own problems. Then everything changed in a single moment. An older gentleman standing near the middle doors suddenly grabbed his chest. His briefcase hit the floor with a loud thud. Before anyone could react, he collapsed. People gasped and stepped back, unsure what to do. Some pulled out their phones, others just stared in shock. Rachel didn't think, she just moved. Years of training kicked in as she pushed through the crowd and dropped to her knees beside the man. She checked for a pulse, tilted his head back, and started chest compressions. Her voice was calm but firm as she called out instructions to the people around her. Someone needed to call emergency services. Someone needed to help clear the space. David watched this unfold from his seat. His photographer's instinct took over. He pulled out his camera and started capturing the scene. Not in a cruel way, but in the way someone documents something important. The determination on Rachel's face, the crowd forming a protective circle, the way her hands moved with practiced precision. The humanity of strangers, coming together in crisis. Rachel counted compressions out loud, keeping perfect rhythm. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The man's lips were turning blue. Her arms were burning, but she didn't stop. Someone in the crowd knelt down to help. Together, they worked on the man until the train pulled into the next station. Paramedics rushed onto the train with their equipment. Rachel briefed them quickly, professionally. They took over, getting the man stabilized and onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him away, one of the paramedics nodded at Rachel with respect. She'd kept him alive long enough for them to arrive. The crowd slowly dispersed. People went back to their commutes, their lives, their problems. But something had shifted in that train car. For just a few minutes, everyone had witnessed what it meant to show up for a complete stranger. Rachel stood up, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She grabbed the support pole to steady herself. That's when David approached her. He was holding his camera, looking almost nervous. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm really sorry to bother you, but I'm a photographer. I captured what you just did. I think people need to see this." Rachel turned to him, and for a moment her exhaustion turned to anger. "You were taking pictures? While someone was dying?" David stepped back slightly, holding up his hands. "No. I mean, yes, but not like that. What you did was incredible. The way you didn't hesitate, the way you knew exactly what to do. People need to see that kind of courage." "That wasn't courage," Rachel said, her voice flat. "That was just my job. And I don't need my picture taken while I'm doing it." She started to walk away. But David followed, keeping a respectful distance. "Please, just look at one photo. Just one. Then if you want me to delete them all, I will. I promise." Something in his voice made her stop. Maybe it was because he sounded as tired as she felt. Maybe it was because she could hear the sincerity in his words. She turned around and looked at his camera screen. The image took her breath away. It wasn't posed or staged. It was raw and real. Her face was focused, intense. Her hands were blurred with motion, but what struck her most was the circle of faces around her. Strangers looking down with concern and hope. Ordinary people on an ordinary train, witnessing something extraordinary. That's what I saw, David said quietly. That's what I want other people to see. Not just the emergency, but the response. The way you showed up. The way everyone stepped up to help. Rachel looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she looked at David. What's your name? David. I'm Rachel. She sighed. Look, I need to get to work. I'm already late. But here's my email. Send me the photos. I'll think about it. She scribbled her email on a piece of paper from her bag and handed it to him. Then she walked off the train and into the hospital, leaving David standing there with his camera and a strange feeling that his life had just changed direction in a way he didn't quite understand yet. 3 days passed before David worked up the courage to email Rachel. He spent those 3 days editing the photos, printing a few of his favorites, and trying to figure out what to say. Finally, he wrote a simple message explaining an idea that had been growing in his mind. He wanted to create a photo story about the people who work in hospitals, not the dramatic emergency room scenes everyone sees on TV, but the quiet moments, the real moments. And he wanted Rachel to help him see that world. Rachel almost deleted the email. She had enough on her plate without adding some photographer's project to it. But something made her read it twice. Maybe it was the way he wrote about his younger sister, who had passed away from cancer when she was only 12. He wrote about the nurses who had cared for her, how they had made her laugh, even on the hardest days, how they had held his mother when she cried, how one nurse had stayed 2 hours past her shift just to sit with his sister because she was scared of being alone. That story touched something in Rachel. She understood that kind of loss. It was why she became a nurse in the first place. Her little brother had been sick when they were kids, really sick, and there was this one nurse, Miss Peterson, who had made everything feel a little less scary. Miss Peterson would sit with Rachel's brother and tell him stories. She'd sneak him extra pudding cups. She'd let Rachel help with simple tasks so she felt useful instead of helpless. When her brother finally recovered, Rachel knew exactly what she wanted to do with her life. She agreed to meet David at a coffee shop near the hospital. Just to talk, no promises. David showed up with a folder of his work and a nervous energy. He showed her photos from different projects, a series on small business owners, another on street musicians. Each image told a story. He had a gift for capturing people in their most authentic moments. One day, Rachel said firmly, "You can follow me for one shift. After that, we'll see." That one day turned into a week. David showed up every morning with his camera, staying quiet and respectful. He photographed Rachel, checking on patients, reviewing charts, talking with worried families, but he also noticed things she had stopped seeing. The way the janitor, Mr. Rodriguez, left small encouraging notes tucked into patient rooms. The way Dr. Patel, the oldest surgeon in the hospital, still held the hands of family members when delivering difficult news. The young resident, barely out of medical school, who donated blood every 2 weeks without fail. Rachel found herself seeing her workplace differently through David's lens. She had been so focused on her own exhaustion and problems that she'd stopped noticing the small acts of kindness happening all around her. One evening, after a particularly long shift, Rachel and David sat in the empty hospital cafeteria, reviewing the photos on his laptop. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Cold coffee sat forgotten on the table. "Why did you really become a nurse?" David asked, scrolling through images. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she told him about her brother. About Miss Peterson. About how she wanted to be that person for other families. "But lately," she admitted, "I've been wondering if I still have that in me. Everything feels so hard right now. The hours, the stress, the sadness. My marriage fell apart because I was never home. I'm drowning in debt from nursing school. Some days I wonder if any of it matters." David stopped scrolling and looked at her. "It matters. Trust me, it matters." He showed her a photo he'd taken 2 days earlier. Rachel was sitting with an elderly patient, just holding her hand. The woman had been scared before a procedure. Rachel had pulled up a chair and stayed with her, talking about nothing important. Just being present. "You don't remember this moment, do you?" David asked. Rachel shook her head. "That's because it felt ordinary to you. But look at her face. Look at how much it meant to her." Rachel felt something crack open in her chest. When had she stopped noticing these moments? When had they become invisible to her? Over the next few days, something shifted between Rachel and David. They talked more, shared more. David told her about his failing business, his fear that he'd wasted years chasing a dream. Rachel told him about signing the divorce papers in her car during lunch break, crying alone where nobody could see. They were two people who had been feeling invisible, suddenly seeing each other clearly. David posted the photo essay on his website and social media, with a simple title: "The Hands That Heal." He had maybe 3,000 followers, mostly other photographers, and a few loyal supporters. He didn't expect much. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from people sharing their own hospital stories, thanking nurses, tagging healthcare workers they knew. News websites reached out asking permission to feature the work. A national magazine wanted to do a full spread. A local gallery called offering an exhibition space. Rachel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Coworkers were texting her. Her mother called crying happy tears. Even her ex-husband sent a brief message saying he'd seen it and was proud of her. The attention felt strange and uncomfortable. She was a private person. She didn't want to be some kind of symbol or inspiration. She just wanted to do her job. But the attention kept growing. People recognized her at the grocery store. Local news wanted interviews. Other hospitals reached out asking if she'd speak at their events. It was all too much. Too fast. Then David told her he'd submitted the work to a major photojournalism competition. He hadn't asked her first. He just did it. Rachel found out from a colleague who saw the competition announcement online. She felt her face get hot with anger. She called David immediately. "You submitted my photos to a competition? Without asking me? They're not just your photos," David said, his voice defensive. "It's my work too. This is my career we're talking about. This could change everything for me. This could change everything for me. So that's what this was about? Using me as your ticket to success? That's not fair, Rachel. I was celebrating what you do. I was showing people something important. You were showing people me, without my permission. Do you know how that feels? Like I'm just some subject in your portfolio. Another project for you to profit from." The argument escalated. Words were said that both of them regretted. David accused Rachel of not understanding what it took to build a creative career. Rachel accused David of exploiting her vulnerability for his own gain. They hung up angry, hurt, and convinced the other person was wrong. Rachel threw herself back into work, trying to ignore the continued attention from the photos. She declined interview requests and speaking opportunities. She wanted everything to go back to normal, but normal wasn't coming back. Instead, something unexpected started happening. Letters began arriving at the hospital addressed to her. Not just a few letters. Dozens. Then hundreds. A 17-year-old girl wrote that she'd been planning to pursue business school because it seemed practical. But after seeing Rachel's photo, she decided to follow her real dream of becoming a nurse. A doctor wrote that he'd been considering early retirement, burned out and exhausted. But the photos reminded him why he'd entered medicine in the first place. Families of former patients wrote thanking her, saying they'd always wanted to express their gratitude but didn't know how. One letter stood out. It was from a woman whose husband had a heart attack on a train 6 months earlier. A stranger had performed CPR and saved his life. But in the chaos, they never got to thank her properly. She'd seen Rachel's photo and recognized her as that stranger. Her husband was alive and healthy, playing with their grandchildren. Because of what Rachel had done, Rachel sat in her apartment reading these letters one by one. She cried. Then she got angry at herself for crying. Then she cried some more. People's lives were changing because of a few photographs. Because David had decided to point his camera at an ordinary moment and show the world it wasn't ordinary at all. Meanwhile, David's career was taking off exactly as he'd hoped. Gallery shows, magazine assignments, interview requests. He was being called an emerging voice in documentary photography. He should have been happy. He'd worked for this his whole career, but he felt empty. Every congratulations felt hollow. Every opportunity felt meaningless. He kept thinking about the argument with Rachel, about the hurt in her voice, about how he'd convinced himself that his intentions mattered more than her consent. He realized he'd done exactly what he accused other photographers of doing. He'd seen a good shot and taken it, justifying it afterwards with noble reasons. He'd prioritized the work over the person. The competition results came in. His photo series won second place and a significant cash prize. David stared at the notification on his computer screen and felt nothing but shame. Rachel used some of the money from the magazine feature to make a serious dent in her nursing school debt. For the first time in years, she could breathe a little easier financially. But more importantly, she used the platform she'd been given to start something new. She created a simple blog called Behind the Scrubs, where healthcare workers could share their stories anonymously if they wanted. Not the dramatic life or death moments, but the small victories, the funny incidents, the heartbreaks, the reasons they kept showing up day after day. The response was immediate. Nurses, doctors, technicians, and support staff from around the country started submitting stories. Rachel posted one every few days, sometimes adding her own thoughts, sometimes letting the stories speak for themselves. It became a community, a space where people in healthcare could be honest about the challenges and rewards of their work. Rachel also enrolled in a nurse practitioner program at the local university, something she'd been putting off for years. If people were going to see her as some kind of inspiration, she figured she might as well become the best version of herself she could be. She didn't contact David. She told herself she didn't need to. They'd served their purpose in each other's lives, and now it was time to move on. David's career continued to flourish, but he found himself repeatedly drawn back to healthcare settings for his work. A magazine sent him to photograph a children's hospital. A non-profit hired him to document community health workers. Every assignment took him back to hospitals, clinics, examination rooms. During one assignment at a pediatric oncology ward, David photographed a little girl with leukemia. She was maybe 8 years old, bald from chemotherapy, but smiling as she showed him a drawing she'd made. She reminded him so much of his sister that he had to step out of the room for a moment to compose himself. The girl's mother found him in the hallway. "Are you the photographer who did that series about the nurse? The one on the train?" David nodded, surprised. "That story changed my life," the woman said. "Not just the photos, but what came after." The nurse, Rachel. She runs this blog where healthcare workers share their stories. I read it every day. It helped me understand what the staff here goes through. It made me more patient, more grateful, and Rachel actually reached out to me personally when she found out about my daughter. She's visited us twice. Just to talk, to offer support. She didn't have to do that. She just did. The woman pulled out her phone and showed David a photo. Rachel sitting beside the little girl, both of them laughing at something. The girl was showing Rachel a sparkly pink notebook, clearly excited. Rachel helps families like mine navigate the medical system. She connects people with resources. She just shows up. That's who she is. David felt something shift inside him. While he'd been chasing recognition and career milestones, Rachel had been quietly turning their collaboration into something that actually helped people. She'd taken the attention and channeled it into service. She hadn't needed his photos or his permission to do meaningful work. She'd just done it. That night, David went down a rabbit hole reading Rachel's blog. Hours passed as he read story after story. Nurses talking about the patient who made them laugh during a hard shift. Doctors sharing the moment they knew they'd chosen the right career. Respiratory therapists describing the feeling of helping someone breathe easier. The writing was simple, honest, and deeply human. In one post, Rachel had written about their collaboration and their falling out. She didn't mention David by name, but he knew it was about them. She wrote about learning to hold space for her own anger, while also acknowledging that people's intentions aren't always as simple as good or bad. She wrote about how the photos had initially felt like a violation, but over time she'd seen how they had sparked something bigger than either of them intended. She wrote about forgiveness being less about excusing harm and more about releasing the grip it has on your heart. David sat in his studio apartment, surrounded by prints and camera equipment, and understood how alone he'd become in his success. He'd won awards but lost the connection that made the work meaningful in the first place. He had an idea. It would take months to pull together, and he had no idea if Rachel would accept it. But he had to try. David spent 6 months working on something new. He traveled to hospitals and clinics across the country, photographing healthcare workers with their permission and their input. But this time, he didn't just take photos. He sat with people and listened to their stories. He asked what they wanted the world to know. He collaborated instead of just documenting. He also reached out to Rachel. Not directly, but through her blog. He asked if some of the writers would be willing to have their stories paired with photographs. Many said yes. David worked with each person to create images that reflected their words, their experiences, their truth. He rented a gallery space for one night, exactly 1 year after the morning on the train. He called the exhibition Two Strangers, One Moment, and designed it to tell the full story. The original photos of Rachel were there, but now surrounded by hundreds of other images and stories. Healthcare workers from everywhere, their faces, their words, their daily acts of courage. But the centerpiece was something different. David had tracked down everyone whose life had changed after seeing Rachel's photo. The teenager who decided to become a nurse, the burned-out doctor who stayed in medicine, the families who started volunteering at hospitals, the people who began blood donation programs in their communities. He photographed each of them and displayed their stories alongside the original image of Rachel performing CPR. 15 people had entered nursing programs because of that photo. 8 had become regular blood donors. Dozens had reconciled with estranged family members, deciding not to wait to show love. The ripple effects were stunning and specific and real. David didn't tell Rachel about the exhibition. Instead, he asked Dr. Patel from her hospital to bring her, saying only that it was important. When Rachel walked into the gallery that evening, she stopped in the doorway. Her hand went to her mouth. The space was filled with people, but everything seemed to go quiet as she took in what David had created. She walked slowly through the exhibition, reading stories, looking at faces. She recognized some of the blog contributors. She saw patients she'd cared for. She saw the ripple effects of a single moment displayed like a map of human connection. When she reached the center of the gallery, she found David waiting. He looked nervous, hopeful, uncertain. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly. "But I needed you to see this. None of this is about me or my career anymore. It's about what you started. What we accidentally started together. My sloob. Look tensive universind. My naltiv. They work embod of some this world. This is noting grand. Other way that doesn't. Also this world." Rachel looked at the wall behind him. The original photo of her doing CPR. But now it was surrounded by faces and stories of people whose lives had changed because they'd witnessed that moment. "The exhibition is raising money for nursing scholarships," David continued. "For students who can't afford school. Every print sold goes to the fund. I'm not keeping anything." Rachel felt tears on her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "You did all this?" "You did this," David corrected. "I just documented it. You're the one who turned anger into action. You're the one who built a community. You're the one who showed up for people like that mother and her daughter. I was just chasing credit for something you were actually living." They stood there in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by evidence of how one moment can change everything if people choose to do something with it. "I'm sorry," David said, "for not asking permission, for putting my career above your consent, for not understanding that the person in the photo matters more than the photo itself." 71. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm sorry too. For not understanding what you were trying to do. For being so angry that I couldn't see how the work was affecting people. We were both learning." They talked for a long time that night. About fear and hope. About how scared they'd both been, that their pain was meaningless. About how the train that morning had given them both something they didn't know they needed. A mirror showing them who they could be. The exhibition ran for 3 months and raised enough money to fund nursing scholarships for 20 students. Rachel and David didn't become a couple. They didn't even become traditional friends. But they became something more valuable. Partners in showing the world what everyday courage looks like. 2 years later, David photographed Rachel's graduation from the nurse practitioner program. She was standing in her cap and gown, surrounded by her family and colleagues, smiling wider than he'd ever seen her smile. This time, he asked permission before taking the photo. This time, she said yes without hesitation. They both understood now that the story was never about them. It was about what happens when people witness each other's humanity and choose to amplify it. About how a stranger's courage can wake something up inside you that you thought was gone. About how one moment, one choice, one act of showing up can create ripples that spread further than anyone could predict. The photo of Rachel on the train still hangs in hospitals and nursing schools around the country. But now, it's accompanied by thousands of other stories. Other faces. Other moments. Other strangers choosing to show up for each other in ordinary, extraordinary ways. And somewhere, on morning trains and in hospital hallways and in quiet moments all over the world, people are still saving each other, still witnessing each other, still creating moments that change everything.